Rainbow Six has a lot of woke characters, which may come as a shock to anybody who just rose from cryosleep out of 2014. Let's take a look at how much the woke mind virus has permeated throughout this game. The most relatively recent woke character the game added was Scopos, who is disabled. And that's not to say that Ubisoft shouldn't get any credit at all when they get it right. A good example of a non-woke character they recently added is the Portuguese operator Tubarão, who looks like an actual counter-terrorist guy, complete with cool hat and camouflaged BDUs. He also has facial hair, which is something that men have. And men are the opposite of woke because they are cool and based with big muscles, unlike women who are dumb and annoying.
Like, man eat steak, pork, chitlin, woman eat salad. That's just what it is. I want to watch football.
Like Tubarão, Blackbeard is another great example of a non-woke operator who also possesses facial hair and is a big beard guy with an F-150 pickup truck. His combat brotherly bond with Tubarão is very manly. In the extended character lore, some dialogue from Blackbeard regarding Tubarão goes like this: "Every man's different. Tubes is trans." Sorry, hold on. Guys, you're not going to believe it. It turns out the extent of the woke mind virus goes deeper than I ever previously imagined. Not only did Ubisoft write in one trans character who looks like a normal human, they also wrote in another trans character who looks like a normal human. This is, of course, extremely woke, and the only reason that I even know about this was because I went out of my way to click on the character bios buried under two different sets of menus that bear no mechanical design on the gameplay itself. Had it not been for me taking additional time to interact with material unrelated to the base gameplay loop, I would never have uncovered this sinister plot. But what may shock you is that the plot goes as far back as 2015, when the game was initially supposedly about cool guys doing military stuff with a gun from a helicopter. This was, of course, a cheap trick. The original vanilla operators, as they're called, included 3 women in combat roles, which is, of course, woke. This roster also included 4 operators from the communist country of, you guessed it, France. Years later, Rainbow Six would keep the woke machine in lockstep, with the addition of an operator who was just a complete fucking moron. So dudes, if it wasn't obvious, the premise of the video is a bit of a half joke, or maybe it's not really a joke at all. Ubisoft is a company that faces consistent pressure in the content creation space. It is a predominant target of the culture war of the 2020s. How much of it has to do with the quality of the games? I'm not really sure. Now, I tried some of the Assassin's Creed games after the big switch into an RPG kind of style, and I realized they weren't for me. Far Cry 5 was my first Far Cry game and didn't really color me terribly impressed with its storytelling, feeling like it kind of blew its stack too early in the first act and just kind of left the game sort of aimless, and you just kind of run around and shoot AI for 5 hours. Far Cry 6 kind of had similar problems. Rainbow Six Siege feels like the only Ubisoft IP I've invested a crap ton of time into in the past 10 years, and I've seen a lot of audiences for this game come and go, but nothing has ever had a more bizarre kind of ebb and flow than Ubisoft multiplayer titles. I'd go as far to describe Rainbow Six Siege as the most diverse audience for a tactical shooter ever made. And I don't mean that in terms of diversity just because my trans ass is commenting about it. No, I mean diverse in the sense that you've got very conservative gamer bros and very liberal gamer gals who are both in the same audience playing the same game. And many of those gamer gals, you know, were not assigned gal at birth. So that's even super more woke than any other woke has ever woked before. And the usual malarkey, the usual hoopla when it comes to the presence of gamer gals, especially ones who are not assigned gal at birth in a game like this, is a story I've read for a long time. It goes all the way back to 2014, really, if we want to get all Gamergatey with it. If you're not familiar with what Gamergate was, do yourself a favor and ignore that I even brought it up, because any research on the topic is basically like sticking your brain into a black hole. But what I'm about to describe does have roots in that era. And basically the crux of the argument about why Rainbow Six Siege shouldn't have a diverse cast, if somebody is making that case, just kind of comes down to, well, you know, you can summarize it with this. Can you go away? No. What? Basically, just like any other hobby, right? You know, I don't think there's a lot of Trump supporters out there listening to Chappell Roan. I'm sure there's maybe a couple of them. Basically, politics are kind of a litmus test into the soul. You know, I know a lot of people try to go off of this whole kumbaya, like, oh, you know, everybody's like different from their whatever. And obviously there are exceptions. Sometimes there are a lot of exceptions, and people don't fit in neatly packaged boxes. But Tom Clancy was an unashamed Republican. He was a big Reagan guy. If you watch his movies, if you read his books, he definitely has a certain idea, I think, about how American foreign policy, particularly when it comes to matters in the military, should have been handled. Does that mean that I think if the old late Tom Clancy was still around, that he'd agree with every single thing that's going on? No, I don't think that. But the current landscape is not the same as it was before he passed. For everything that Tom Clancy was, I do not think that he would have been really keen to be friendly or amicable with the Russian Federation, especially Putin. Do I think he would have objected to an albino research and development head for the science and engineering of something rainbow related? No. Do I think he would have objected to a Nakota operator with visible face tattoos? No. Do I think he would have objected to Tubarão if he looked at him? No. I don't think he would have even objected to Osa if he looked at her. And the only reason that I think he might have objected, if there was an objection to be made, probably would have been the lesbian haircut. You know, I don't think Tom Clancy would have been out here clocking people. The whole entire premise that military anything has to be inherently anti-diversity, inherently anti-woke, is one of the most self-defeating, just like paradoxical statements that anybody can make, especially for an organization like Team Rainbow. And I don't think people understand that an organization like Team Rainbow, if it were to exist for the purpose of its operational capacity, right, for the purpose of its functionality, in order to function at the highest level, an organization like that would literally need as many different perspectives as possible so that you could get the most amount of information on whatever topic you are trying to assess strategically. So it's not even a fucking agenda thing, right? There's no emotional argument even being made at that point. At that point, that's an argument of logic. And it is appropriate for this to happen with something like Rainbow Six, because that's the way it also works in reality. That's the way it has worked in reality. I always go back to this whole thing with the genealogy of special forces as most people know of them today, at least in popular media anyway. Everything that you know about special forces, the books that were written on this stuff, right? The actual framework of it was born during World War II. You know, the whole taking down the biggest bads the world had ever seen kind of thing. A very woke message, if you will. Jesus Christ, do you want to talk about woke? I mean, World War II was like the most woke war that ever fucking happened. We teamed up with the communists, for Christ's sake. A lot of arguments got written during that period, right? Like coming out of World War II, and then you had the return to civilian life. A lot of arguments concerning desegregation got their start in the military, right? Integrating the armed forces during World War II was a pretty big priority of Ike Eisenhower, who eventually became president, and he was a Republican. And then he had more woke fucking economic policies than any Republican has had in like the past 50 years. Take 30 minutes. It might not even take that amount of time. And I am sure that you can find a woke story out of World War II for pretty much every demographic that you can think of. The guy who invented computers, basically, Alan Turing, decoding German war correspondence encrypted by the Enigma machine. This guy was so goddamn smart that he realized he needed a mathematical machine, right? Something that could process mathematics faster than he could to crack this code. Him and his team built that machine, and that is the bedrock of computing. He was basically tortured to death for being gay by his own country after he had helped them defeat the Nazis. Just fucking awful tragic story. Everybody knows about Rosie the Riveter, but you know, what made that significant at the time was the fact that women were going into traditionally male-dominated fields that were previously associated, you know, with strength, with men with muscles. And the gals were doing it, right? The girlies were doing it. They were doing mechanical stuff. They were riveting. They were bolting things in. They were working on machines. parts, right? Like factory lines. Women were homemakers at this time, right? This is fucking 1941 when the return bros always talk about how, oh yeah, we got to get back to the nuclear family in 1960s. Are you sure about that? You want to return back to the point at which things were starting to get shook up the most? Like, you want to go back to the point at which things started to change drastically when the most amount of changes in agency for women and people of color in particular were starting to take place. That's the point at which you want to go back? You want to go back to that? All of these games, right, that these guys are so obsessed with end up actually being critiques of the things that they're obsessed with. Fallout is obviously a good example of that. Halo is not an endorsement of religious fanaticism. Like, obviously the game is a critique of that. I know a lot of bread tubers are going to give me shit for this one, but hell, I mean, even Call of Duty, Modern Warfare 2, right? Commander Shepard is basically just the military industrial complex. Bro literally just starts World War III because he's bored. It'd be one thing if Rainbow Six was going out of its way to include circumstances or representations, viewpoints throughout the security community that did not exist if they were arbitrarily placed there just to have them. But I mean, if I go through the entire operator list, I just can't find a single example that I look at and I see that and I go, wow, this literally just does not exist in real life. Like, every single character represents a perspective that is in that sphere, and not necessarily everything having to do with guys who kick down doors and go shoot bang. Obviously, Yana in particular, right? I did a video on that a long time ago. She's not going to be doing operator stuff, right? She has albinism. That's a disqualifying thing for that sort of job description. That's not me being rude. That's not me being combative. That is just the reality, right? You're not going to be able to do that kind of work because it interferes with your vision. However, that's not her role in Team Rainbow, right? Her role is as an engineer. Her role is as a technology development person. That makes sense. That's pretty reasonable. And everybody was making fun of it at the time, right? Operation Void Edge, when it came out in 2019, Yana comes out and she's like a space Metal Gear Solid character. What's going on? We're doing Rainbow in space? This really jumped the shark. And then we have a Space Force now, right? So these things are all connected. I think Ubisoft does a pretty good job of trying to provide some realm of legitimacy to the perspective that they add. And again, anybody who looks at this stuff from the big picture lens and specifically says it is not diverse, that diversity does not exist, I don't care if they're the Secretary of Defense. Okay, that's incorrect. That's just an incorrect, wrong, false statement. It's not true now. It's never been true. It was not true during the American Revolution. The man who trained the Continental Army, who fought against the British, was a gay man. There have been, and there will continue to be trans soldiers, despite whatever people do to cover the stories up, which has been happening tragically quite recently in my home country. There was a trans Union Army soldier. His name was Albert Cashier. There was a trans RAF pilot who transitioned after the war. According to my president, neither of these people had any business being involved in matters of the military. They are lacking in humility and selflessness that is required to be a soldier. Unfortunately for Donald Trump, these individuals and many more still shed sweat and blood fighting against fascist ends, so his opinion of them amounts to jack fucking shit. God rest their souls. People from every single walk of life that you can possibly imagine have contributed to the national defense, because the national defense is a civic service. And just like any civic service, just like running the subway or inspecting food to make sure it's not spoiled, inspecting drugs to make sure that they're safe for consumption, a civic service is going to include a wide variety of people. A crime fighting team is going to represent the world. Guess what? It's going to represent every single perspective that it can represent. From a fictional point of view, from a modern cultural lens, Rainbow Six is a team of the world, and the world is woke. As long as the world is woke, Team Rainbow is woke. There are people who are angry about that, and there are people who are not. Thanks for watching. Deuces.